Victoria had dedicated 15 years of her career to TechLogic, investing her expertise, time, and passion into developing cutting-edge technology. As a senior research engineer, she had played a crucial role in the company's success, especially in creating the distributed processing algorithm that powered its flagship product. Despite her contributions, the company saw her as just another employee, one they could replace when it became convenient. That moment arrived on a Wednesday morning in a small conference room where she faced Marjorie Thompson, the company's head of operations, and Denise from HR. Their carefully curated expressions of corporate regret barely masked the underlying decision that had already been made. Victoria, after 15 years with TechLogic, we are restructuring your position, Marjorie announced, her voice carrying an unmistakable air of finality. Denise nodded solemnly and pushed a manila folder across the table. The company is moving in a new direction, she added, using the kind of impersonal corporate jargon that diluted the harshness of the reality they were imposing. Victoria accepted the folder without hesitation. She already knew what was inside: the standard severance package, 2 weeks' pay for every year of service, 3 months of continued health coverage, and a list of career counseling services she had no intention of using. None of this was unexpected. What neither Marjorie nor Denise knew was that Victoria had been preparing for this moment for weeks. Her foresight had come from an accidental email, an internal thread that had been misdirected to her inbox. The message had outlined a detailed strategy. The company planned to claim her algorithm as proprietary technology, remove her from her role, and secure the patent without her name attached. It was a calculated maneuver, one that TechLogic believed she would accept without resistance. But Victoria was no fool. She had spent the past few months documenting every step of her development process, ensuring that the work she had done on her personal time was irrefutably separate from her official responsibilities at TechLogic. Even more critically, she had filed for the patent herself, an action that TechLogic had overlooked in their arrogance. The moment they pushed her out, she would walk away with sole ownership of the technology they relied on most. As Marjorie continued speaking, gaining confidence from Victoria's lack of protest, she concluded, "We'll need your key card, company laptop, and phone before you leave. Your team will be notified this afternoon." Victoria gave a small nod, her face unreadable. 6 engineers reported directly to her, 6 brilliant minds she had personally mentored. Together, they had turned a theoretical concept into a market-dominating innovation. And now, TechLogic was casting her aside as though her role had been secondary. With a measured breath, Victoria rose from her chair. "Of course," she said evenly. Marjorie and Denise exchanged glances, clearly taken aback by her composure. They had expected pushback, perhaps anger, maybe even tears. Instead, they found themselves met with quiet confidence. As Victoria walked back to her office, she sent a single text message from her personal phone: "It's happening. Friday is my last day." The response was immediate. "Perfect timing. Contracts are ready. Dinner tonight to finalize details." Victoria smiled. They had no idea what was coming. For years, Victoria had poured her expertise into developing a groundbreaking distributed processing algorithm, one that had transformed TechLogic's flagship product into an industry leader. Her work was the backbone of the company's success, yet she had always noticed how executives downplayed her contributions, giving credit to vague teams or, more often, to themselves. Still, she had not expected outright betrayal, until she stumbled upon an email that changed everything. The email, unintentionally forwarded to her by a distracted executive assistant, was part of a confidential internal thread discussing the company's future intellectual property strategy. What she read made her stomach tighten. The memo detailed a calculated plan. TechLogic intended to claim her algorithm as its own, removing her from the company before securing the patent. Without her presence, they believed they could formalize their ownership without challenge. The document made it clear, her name would be erased from her own creation, and her dismissal would be framed as a routine restructuring. At first, she had been stunned. Was this really happening? She had spent years refining that algorithm, building upon it, pushing the limits of its capabilities. And now, the very company that had benefited from her brilliance was preparing to discard her as if she were expendable. But shock quickly turned into something else: determination. TechLogic had made a critical mistake. They had assumed she wouldn't see this coming. They had assumed she would leave quietly, accepting her severance package and fading into obscurity while they took full control of her work. But Victoria was not so easily outmaneuvered. Instead of confronting them immediately, she took action in silence. She began meticulously reviewing her employment agreement, scrutinizing the clauses related to intellectual property ownership. What she found only strengthened her resolve. The contract was clear: any work developed during company hours and with company resources belonged to TechLogic. But what about the refinements she had made on her personal time, using her own equipment? Those were not covered by the agreement. For the next several weeks, she worked discreetly, ensuring every update she made to the algorithm outside of work was thoroughly documented with timestamps and logs. Then, she took the final step: she filed for a patent under her own name. She knew TechLogic's legal team had delayed filing their application, assuming they had time. But she had beaten them to it. When she received confirmation that the patent had been approved, she allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. It was done. The very technology TechLogic believed they could steal was now legally protected under her name. They thought they were playing chess, but they hadn't realized she had already won the game before they made their first move. From that moment on, everything she did was carefully calculated. She continued to show up to work, continued to attend meetings, and continued to act as though she was unaware of what was happening. Meanwhile, she had begun quiet discussions with Precision Systems, TechLogic's biggest competitor. They understood the value of her algorithm, and more importantly, they recognized her worth. The deal they offered was more than generous: a lucrative signing bonus, a leadership position, and exclusive rights to her patent. Victoria knew it was only a matter of time before TechLogic delivered the news of her termination. What they didn't know was that she was already prepared to walk away. And when she did, she wouldn't just be leaving with her dignity intact, she would be taking their future with her. Victoria had always known that knowledge was power, and in the weeks leading up to her inevitable dismissal from TechLogic, she made sure she held all the cards. Unlike her superiors, who saw her as a replaceable asset, she understood the true value of her work. While they were busy orchestrating her removal, she had been silently fortifying her position, ensuring that when the moment came, she would not walk away empty-handed. The key was preparation. Victoria had spent years refining the distributed processing algorithm that powered TechLogic's flagship product. But she had also spent years observing how the corporate machine operated, how executives strategically positioned themselves to take credit for innovations, how legal teams manipulated intellectual property claims, and how employees who weren't careful found their work swallowed by the company with little to no recognition. She refused to be one of them. 3 months before she received her severance folder, she had already started her own preparations. She knew the company had delayed filing a patent for her algorithm, likely assuming they had time to finalize the paperwork before she was pushed out. What they hadn't anticipated was that Victoria had already been making refinements to the algorithm, on her own time, using her own resources, in a way that fell completely outside the boundaries of her employment agreement. The changes were substantial, enough to increase processing efficiency by 43%, and legally, they belonged to her alone. With every improvement, she carefully documented her work, ensuring there was an indisputable timeline proving when and how the refinements had been made. She kept meticulous records, logging her development outside of company hours, using personal equipment, and making sure there was no connection between TechLogic and her personal project. Then, she took the final step, filing for a patent under her own name. It was a race, and she won. The patent was granted before TechLogic even realized what was happening. By the time they would start digging into their legal paperwork, they would find that they had no rightful claim to her innovation. The very foundation of their most valuable product was now outside their control. Of course, simply securing the patent wasn't enough. Victoria had to ensure her next move was just as strategic. That's when she reached out to Gregory Sullivan, CEO of Precision Systems, TechLogic's biggest competitor. Their initial conversations had been cautious, but as soon as she revealed what she had secured, the discussions moved quickly. Greg understood exactly what she was offering. With the exclusive rights to her patent, Precision Systems could not only integrate the technology into their own products, but also control licensing agreements for any company that wanted to use it, including TechLogic itself. The deal was lucrative: a 7-figure signing bonus, substantial equity in the company, and the position of Chief Innovation Officer. On the night before her termination was announced, she met Greg for dinner in a discreet, private alcove at a high-end restaurant. "They actually did it," Greg said, shaking his head as he reviewed the final paperwork. "I suspected they might, but I can't believe they cut the person who built their core technology." Victoria smirked. "Victor never understood what I actually created. He saw the surface, the marketability. But the architecture, the true foundation, that was just tech stuff to him." Greg slid a folder across the table. "Everything is in place. As soon as you sign, the deal is official. On Monday morning, Precision Systems will announce exclusive licensing rights, and TechLogic will find itself in an entirely new world." Victoria picked up the pen, her heart steady. In one elegant move, she had secured her future, protected her work, and ensured that the company that had underestimated her would soon feel the full weight of their mistake. With a final stroke of ink, the deal was sealed. "Here's to new beginnings," Greg said, raising his glass. Victoria clinked hers against his, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. "And to owning your own value." By the time Victoria walked out of TechLogic's headquarters for the last time, she knew exactly what was coming. While the executives who had dismissed her believed they had successfully removed a redundant employee, they were blissfully unaware that they had just lost the very foundation of their company's success. For years, TechLogic had relied on her expertise, capitalizing on her innovations while giving little thought to her contributions. Now, their negligence was about to cost them everything. The first signs of trouble appeared the very next morning. What should have been a routine start to the workweek quickly unraveled into chaos. At 7:00 a.m., Precision Systems, TechLogic's fiercest competitor, publicly announced its acquisition of the exclusive rights to Victoria's patented algorithm. Even more shocking was the news that she had joined their executive team as Chief Innovation Officer. The reaction within TechLogic was immediate. At first, there was disbelief. How could their former employee now control the technology that powered their flagship product? But as legal teams rushed to analyze the situation, a horrifying reality set in. Without Victoria's algorithm, AccountSphere, the company's premier software, was at risk of becoming obsolete. Her former team, the 6 engineers she had personally mentored, understood the severity of the situation before the executives did. They had been the ones working closely with her, refining the algorithm, and ensuring its performance. Now, without access to the technology and with no one left who truly understood its complexities, TechLogic was on the brink of a disaster. Miguel, Her lead developer sent her a frantic text. Complete chaos here. What did you do? Victoria read the message with a small smile before replying. Check your personal email. All 6 of you have offers waiting. Within hours, the entire office was buzzing with the news. Victoria's former team had been offered, and had accepted, positions at Precision Systems, each with a significant salary increase and better benefits. It was a devastating blow to TechLogic. Losing Victoria had been reckless. Losing her entire team was catastrophic. By mid-morning, the situation had escalated into a full-blown crisis. TechLogic's CEO, Victor Lawson, had arrived at the office expecting a normal day but was instead met by his general counsel and CFO, both waiting at his door. Their tense expressions told him everything he needed to know. An emergency executive meeting was called. Lawyers scrambled to find a legal recourse, sifting through old contracts and internal documentation. Engineers were ordered to dig through years of code, hoping to find a way to work around the newly patented algorithm. But it was too late. Victoria had covered every angle, ensuring that TechLogic had no choice but to negotiate on her terms. By noon, the industry was abuzz with speculation. TechLogic stock had plummeted 7%, while Precision Systems had surged by 12%. Clients were calling in, concerned about the future of AccountSphere. Investors were demanding explanations. Employees were discreetly updating their LinkedIn profiles, sensing that the company's stability was in jeopardy. At 10:45 a.m., Victoria received an email from Victor himself. Victoria, there appears to be a misunderstanding. Please call me at your earliest convenience to discuss. She didn't bother replying. Instead, she forwarded it to Precision Systems' legal team and continued her morning, unfazed. By the end of the day, it was clear, TechLogic was unraveling. The company had underestimated Victoria's value for years, and now they were paying the price. Meanwhile, she had moved forward, settling into her new role at Precision Systems, watching from her office as her former company fell into the chaos of its own making. The fallout from Victoria's departure hit TechLogic harder than anyone had anticipated. Within days, the company was scrambling to contain the damage. What had initially seemed like a routine restructuring had transformed into a full-blown crisis. Their flagship product, AccountSphere, was now at risk, their stock was plummeting, and their competitors, especially Precision Systems, were seizing every opportunity to capitalize on the chaos. Inside TechLogic's executive boardroom, tension ran high. CEO Victor Lawson sat at the head of the long, glass conference table, his usually confident demeanor replaced by thinly veiled frustration. Around him, the company's top executives, legal counsel, and senior engineers had gathered for an emergency meeting. The topic of discussion was clear: Victoria's patent. We need to find a way around this, Victor said, his voice tight with urgency. There must be some legal loophole, something in her contract that gives us rights to the algorithm. The company's general counsel, a pale-faced man named David Carter, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. We've reviewed the contract multiple times, he admitted. Any intellectual property developed during her employment, using company resources, does belong to TechLogic. Victor leaned forward. Exactly. So what's the issue? David hesitated before responding. The problem is, she documented that the refinements she made were done on her personal time, using her own equipment. Those improvements are what were patented under her name. And unfortunately, he exhaled sharply. We never filed our own patent application in time. Legally, we don't own the rights to the version of the algorithm that is actually in use. The room fell silent. Victor clenched his jaw, his frustration barely contained. So what you're telling me is that we have no legal claim to the technology running our most profitable product? David gave a slow, reluctant nod. That's correct. Without a licensing agreement, we are at risk of intellectual property infringement. The weight of the situation settled over the room like a thick fog. The reality was undeniable. TechLogic had pushed out the one person who not only understood their technology best, but also held the legal rights to it. And now, she was sitting comfortably at Precision Systems, likely watching their implosion with quiet satisfaction. By early afternoon, the company's stock had fallen by 15%, and investors were demanding answers. TechLogic's board of directors had already expressed their concerns about Victor's leadership, questioning how such a critical mistake had been made. At 3:00 p.m., Victor called an all-hands company meeting in an attempt to restore confidence. He stood before the assembled employees, projecting an air of control despite the turmoil behind the scenes. We want to assure everyone that TechLogic remains strong, he began. We are currently exploring legal options and alternative development strategies to ensure our continued leadership in the industry. But the employees in the room weren't convinced. Many had already seen the industry headlines speculating about TechLogic's uncertain future. Others had received calls from recruiters at rival companies, eager to poach top talent. And then there was the most damning sign of all. Several key developers had updated their LinkedIn profiles to open to work in the last 24 hours. When Victor opened the floor for questions, a junior engineer hesitantly raised his hand. Sir, is it true that we never patented the algorithm before Victoria left? A ripple of unease passed through the room. Victor's grip on the podium tightened. We are handling this situation internally, he replied curtly. That's all I can say at this time. The moment the meeting ended, employees flooded the hallways with whispered conversations. The truth was spreading fast. And as Victoria read the updates from Miguel, her former lead developer, she couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of satisfaction. By the time she had left TechLogic, the company had believed they were securing their future by pushing her out. Now, they were realizing that they had done the exact opposite. Victoria had always believed that recognition was just as important as success. For years, she had watched others take credit for her work, seen executives deliver polished presentations built on innovations she had designed, and listened as her contributions were reduced to a footnote in corporate discussions. But not anymore. Now, she was exactly where she belonged, at the helm of innovation, with her name permanently attached to the very algorithm that had once been TechLogic's crown jewel. The company that had dismissed her as expendable was now scrambling to negotiate a licensing agreement for the very technology they had failed to secure. And this time, the terms would be set by her. The final blow to TechLogic came in the form of an official request from their new CEO, Richard Donovan. Unlike Victor Lawson, who had been arrogant and dismissive until the very end, Richard was pragmatic. He understood that the company had made a critical mistake and that the only way forward was to acknowledge it. Victoria read his email carefully. Dr. Jennings. Congratulations on your new position. I've been brought in to help TechLogic navigate the current situation, and I'd like to discuss a fair licensing arrangement for your patented technology. We are prepared to acknowledge your contributions publicly and make appropriate amends for the oversights of previous management. Would you be available to meet next week? She leaned back in her chair, allowing herself a small moment of satisfaction. It had taken 15 years for TechLogic to admit her worth, but they had learned the lesson in the most expensive way possible. Forwarding the email to Precision Systems' legal team, she added a short message. Phase 1 complete. Greg responded within minutes. Beautifully executed. The board is celebrating your first major victory. Looks like TechLogic is finally learning an expensive lesson about valuing innovation and innovators. The irony wasn't lost on her. If TechLogic had simply recognized her value from the beginning, they wouldn't be in this position. Instead, their refusal to give credit where it was due had led to their downfall. By the time the licensing deal was finalized, TechLogic had no choice but to publicly acknowledge her as the creator of the algorithm. The industry took notice. Within days, articles surfaced dissecting the company's blunder, with analysts labeling it as one of the most costly intellectual property missteps in recent memory. Meanwhile, Precision Systems was thriving. Their stock continued to rise, their client list grew, and their reputation as an innovator-friendly company attracted top talent. Victoria, now a recognized leader in the field, received invitations to speak at major industry conferences. One in particular caught her attention, the Women in Technology Leadership Summit. The topic? Owning your intellectual value: how proper documentation changed an industry. As she reviewed the invitation, Greg entered her office, a bottle of champagne in hand. "Happy anniversary," he said, setting 2 glasses on her desk. "The board asked me to share the news with you personally before we announce it to the public." Victoria raised an eyebrow. Precision Systems has officially surpassed TechLogic in market valuation for the first time in company history. She exhaled slowly, a sense of quiet satisfaction settling over her. This wasn't about revenge. It had never been about revenge. It was about recognition. About proving that innovation isn't anonymous, that real people create the technology that drives entire industries forward. Greg poured the champagne, watching her with a knowing smile. "You've become something of an icon, you know," he said. "The story about the executive who didn't recognize what she had until it was gone has become a cautionary tale in corporate boardrooms." Victoria smiled. It was never about taking them down. It was about making sure they never erased my name. She lifted her glass, clinking it against his. "To proper recognition." Greg nodded. "And to the future of innovation, this time, with the right people leading the way." As she took a sip, the sun streamed through her office windows, illuminating the next chapter of her journey, one where her name would never again be forgotten. 1 year after walking out of TechLogic for the last time, Victoria sat in her spacious corner office at Precision Systems, reviewing the latest quarterly innovation report. The numbers were staggering. 3 groundbreaking products built on her patented algorithm had launched within the past year, each capturing significant market share. The company's stock had soared, and with each passing quarter, TechLogic had continued to lose ground. It was a complete reversal of fortune. Just 12 months ago, TechLogic had been an industry giant, confident in its dominance. Now, it was struggling to maintain investor confidence, forced into an expensive licensing agreement just to keep its flagship product running. Their downfall hadn't been caused by external competition, economic downturns, or technological failures. It had been the direct result of their inability to recognize and retain the very people who had built their success. Victoria had no illusions about how corporate structures operated. Companies were quick to celebrate innovation but hesitant to acknowledge the individuals behind it. For years, she had watched executives repackage her ideas as their own, treating her as just another employee rather than the visionary behind the technology that fueled their growth. They had assumed she was replaceable. They had assumed wrong. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Greg entered, holding a sleek envelope in one hand and a bottle of champagne in the other. "Happy anniversary," he said, placing the bottle on her desk. Victoria smirked. "I assume you're not just here to toast another year?" Greg chuckled and handed her the envelope. The board asked me to share the news with you before the official announcement. She opened the envelope and scanned the document inside. It was a company valuation report, one that confirmed what she had already suspected. Precision Systems had officially surpassed TechLogic in market worth. She exhaled slowly, letting the moment sink in. For 15 years, she had dedicated herself to a company that had failed to see her value. For 15 years, she had watched others take credit for her work. Now, everything had changed. Precision Systems had not only given her the title she deserved, but they had thrived because they had built a company culture that valued innovation and the people behind it. Greg poured 2 glasses of champagne and handed one to her. You know, you've become something of a legend in the industry, he said, raising his glass. The woman who outmaneuvered TechLogic. The executive who proved that innovation has a name. Victoria smiled as she clinked her glass against his. It was never about revenge, she said. It was about recognition. About proving that the people who create the technology deserve credit for their work. Greg nodded. Well, I think you've made your point. As they sipped their champagne, Victoria's phone buzzed. It was an invitation to speak at the Women in Technology Leadership Summit. The topic? Owning your intellectual value. How proper documentation changed an industry. Greg glanced at the screen and grinned. See? I told you. You've become an icon. Victoria set her glass down and looked out the window at the city skyline. A year ago, she had left TechLogic with nothing but a cardboard box of personal belongings and the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had outsmarted them. Today, she was leading one of the most innovative companies in the industry, shaping the future of technology on her own terms. And this time, no one would ever erase her name again.